Hi, my name is David Lancaster and I'm here to talk to you about innovation in libraries supporting and sponsoring innovation. That's why I come to a place like this. This is the Icebox at the iSchool at Syracuse University. We built it to be a place of innovation where people could have meetings, think about what they're doing, start small businesses, have coffee clutches, give quick presentations, sit in fancy chairs and hang out, because that's what innovation's about. The startup and the small businesses is all about the idea of this sort of Silicon Valley feel. We have iPads along the wall. We have walls that you can write on. We have presentations that you can give at any given point. We have faculty advisors. We're ready to go. But what if this isn't the way that innovation has to look? Because innovation itself should be a creative process. To a degree, this sort of resembles the Silicon Valley model, which values code, creativity, and money. But that's not what every community certainly values. What if we had creativity look like our communities? Here, hold on one second. Perhaps innovation looks like this. What? Just because you're stuck inside doesn't mean I have to be. We're out here in the field of the university where we're having, I love this, a rocket competition. Here's a community that valued more than just money and code, but they valued the idea of STEM education and engineering. So how did they do it? They brought kids together to launch rockets. Innovation doesn't have to look like software. It doesn't have to look like iPads. It can look like cardboard tubes flying into space. So innovation is all about the values of the community and how we incent the community to try new things. This should be fun.
For the ramparts we watch were so gallantly streaming, and the rock.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! Good try. Go! Here we go.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Of course, there's nothing wrong with making money. Here, a little less rockety noise. Also not a bad view. I'm actually in Lafayette, New York, which is about 15-20 minutes north of Syracuse. And I'm here to talk again about innovation and how innovation can look differently. Now, that's a pretty view, but trust me, it gets much prettier in the fall when all those leaves turn red and gold and yellow and oh, just amazing. And the place I'm standing gets a lot busier. And where am I standing? I'm standing in a place called Beacon Skiff. Beacon Skiff to me represents a sort of local form of innovation. It started as not much more than a roadside stand, a place you could pull over and pick some apples right off the orchard trees. Then they added tractors, and they added a small shack that you could then get fried apple fritters, and apple donuts, and apple cider, and all these wonderful things. And it kept growing and growing, and the parking lot that you see that I'm looking at got bigger and bigger because so did Beacon Skiff's operations and how they began to define what ecotourism was. What you're looking at is the new Beacon Skiff, which includes a distillery, apple vodka, hard apple cider sold internationally, the idea of a cafe, bakery, store, places for people to come, places for people to spend the day. This innovation didn't come from compilers and apps and high bandwidth connections. It came from an understanding of what this community did well and what they could build off of. It came from an understanding of what they knew. Farming is making. Apples are farming. And the idea that we could get out there and begin making within the local community and make it larger and more of a resource, more employment. Over there is the cafe that's open today. This is in June. They have concerts going on the weekends now. So my point is, when we think of innovation and we think of Silicon Valley, we think that we have this image of what innovation is. It's something with mock turtlenecks and high bandwidth connections, compilers and apps. And those are important. Certainly Beacon Skiff relies on its web pages. It relies on it to let people all over the country and increasingly all over the world know what's happening here and to come and join and participate in that. It has retail chains. It has supply side, all that wonderful stuff. But ultimately what it has is a connection to the people and a connection to the earth and a connection to the community that says, we can try something new here, and it doesn't necessarily have to start with code. It can start with apples, start with farms, start with tractors. So let's talk a little bit more about what I mean by innovation itself. So let's get our definition straight. What is innovation? Well, First of all, let's talk about what innovation is not, which is innovation is not necessarily invention. That means that, a lot of people think that innovation is really hard because I'm not an engineer, I'm not a graphic designer, I'm just a librarian. How can I innovate, right? Because innovation, as we all know, is iPads and creating software and chips. And it sounds like I have a problem with iPads, but really I don't. My point being that innovation isn't the idea of creating something brand new from scratch. It can be, but more often than not, what innovation really is about taking ideas and applying them in a novel situation, or taking bits and pieces of ideas, kind of like Legos, and applying them in a unique way, or combining them in a unique way. One of my favorite innovation stories is about a fellow by the name of Danny Biasone. And Danny used to own the Syracuse Nationals, the Syracuse Nats that eventually became the 76ers. And it was a first professional basketball team, and it was here in Syracuse. And Danny had a problem, which was basketball was extremely boring to watch. Now, I know just after the NBA Finals that may be hard to believe, but at the time, it was a defensive game. What happens is you would bounce and get the ball, and you would go ahead and you would get ahead, right? So you would make a basket, you'd get ahead. You'd then sit on the ball for as long as you could until the other team fouled or stole it. But it made for really low-scoring, boring-to-watch games. We're talking like 50 to 60s, scores of 21 to 19 kind of thing. And Danny was bored out of his mind. And so what he looked around and what he found was actually a college coach who had come up with a unique solution. And what he did was he put a clock up above the two baskets and said, you only have a certain amount of time to make a shot. He invented the shot clock. Well, Danny looked at this and said, why not? Why can't I take an idea from college and an idea in the pros and put them together? And he said, what would the ideal score for a pro basketball be? About 80 points divided by the minutes played, and said you got about 24 seconds to make a shot. Once you get the ball, you have 24 seconds to shoot the ball. Change the game overnight. Suddenly, instead of people sitting there and hanging onto the ball and keeping it, they were running and shooting. They were jumping. They were trying to get slam dunks. Then eventually the three-pointers came. The game became much more interesting and energetic to watch. And at the time, television, which was covering baseball, was looking for interesting, energetic sports that they could broadcast. And they suddenly found this new revitalized basketball that was moving everything around, and they said, that's what we need. That's what we need. And so they began paying major contracts, and now what's happened is because Danny got bored and took a really simple idea that was invented in another context called the shot clock and implemented it, turned it into a massive multi-billion-dollar television empire and contract. Innovation doesn't mean that you had to come up with scratch, and it doesn't mean you had to do something big. To Danny, that was a relatively small change, but it totally had an amazing effect that he couldn't have anticipated. Now, since I'm talking about innovation, let me steal another one and talk about the difference between innovation and entrepreneurship. And I'm going to steal from Meg Bacchus, who's right now at Chattanooga Public Library. Here's one way to think about the difference between entrepreneurship and innovation, and it involves the idea of buying a car. Don't worry, Gwen, I'm being careful. When you go to buy a car, it's a big investment. If you want a new car, we're talking, $30,000 or, kind of car that my son wants, $100,000. It's a big investment. They need to check your credit. They need to make sure that you're trustworthy. You need to give them some sort of collateral. All this goes into it. And so the truth is that you have to sit there and think about, is it going to be worth it? Is it going to be worth it in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years? There's a lot of risk involved. If you don't pay it off, will they take it back? Will you lose your credit rating? All of this stuff. This is the entrepreneurship model. This is the market model. This is the idea of entering in and starting up a business. And this is what the libraries were presenting. They were bringing in lawyers and accountants and startup people and everyone to talk about starting your own business. And people were sitting in the audience going, I just need a ride. And so when you need a ride, is it easier to buy the car or to call up a friend who has a car that you can borrow? And that's the idea of innovation. And what Meg thought about was many times these ideas are like borrowing a car, except instead of a car, we're borrowing expertise, we're borrowing time, we're borrowing software, we're borrowing space, we're borrowing resources, we're borrowing all these things. And libraries are into borrowing. We're really good at lending stuff out. we have the idea of not only can you lend out books and 3D and maker spaces and places, we can do all sorts of stuff. In fact, one of my favorite stories comes out of ILEAD in Eureka, Illinois. They don't have a lot of restaurants. It's a small town. And what happened was, Chef Katie, who is a commercial chef who just moved into the area, went over to the librarian and said, there aren't enough places to eat here. Now, rather than the librarian saying, you're correct, and here's a book on business, and here's a business plan, and starting a business, and we'll get you all set up and getting into that risky market stuff, the librarian did something much more brilliant. They said, you see that corner of our property? That's yours. Take it. And every Tuesday, Chef Katie would set up a table and a tent and bring food for lunch. And pretty soon it turned into Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And pretty soon it turned into a commercial kitchen and a catering business. And that's what libraries are really good at. Not necessarily bankrolling the innovation, but giving the encouragement, identifying the motivation, and lending out resources that they have. In this case, not technology and 3D printers, not books, not themselves necessarily, but their space. And this is the idea of innovation at its best. Libraries do this all the time. And the idea is that we can do it in a large scale. We can connect people across libraries. We can organize the information they work with. We can use tools like we learned in ILEAD to access expertise and websites and all of these different things without having to put them into the whole market. Don't worry, I'm almost there. So there you go. Innovation. How easy is that? I mean, all you have to do is talk to our community, see what they want to grow, provide them with a facility, maybe a 3D printer, maybe a business plan, maybe a lawyer, what have you, some space, and we're done, right? Piece of cake. No, not quite. And actually we have to talk about two more issues. One, how innovation occurs, and the second is innovation is not just about the people we serve, it also includes you. So we have to talk about what it takes for librarians to be innovative. And for that, I'm on wheels. Rollerblade. So mind me if I suddenly trip. Don't worry, Glenn. I'm being careful. What we have to learn about innovation is that we have to try again and again and again. Innovation is not something you do on a schedule. Innovation is not something that happens when you plan. You don't create a vice president of innovation and hope for the best. It has to happen across the organization and institution, across the community, but also across librarians. Paraprofessionals can come up with innovation. Reference librarians can come up with innovation. Directors, God forbid, can come up with innovation. But what they have to do is they have to try it. They have to get out there and try it. And little things. It doesn't have to be big. We don't have to come up with a policy to change the whole world. It doesn't even have to be a multi-$1,000 purchase of a 3D printer. Sometimes it could just be trying a little quick new technique at the reference desk, trying a new technique for checkout, saving 3 seconds, 5 seconds in shelving, reorganizing how we do book delivery, what have you. But you gotta try it, and you gotta not be worried about falling. It's kind of like how you learn to rollerblade. You get out, you fall on your butt. You get up, you try again, you fall on your butt. You get up, you try again. And hopefully someday, you're like me, you don't fall on your butt anymore. So innovation is all about trying, failing, doing it quick, not waiting for a policy for everything. That's what it's involved. I'm going to pay attention now before I fall on my butt again, and you think about that. You know, if there's two quotes you've heard by me, one is bad libraries build collections, good libraries build services, great libraries build communities, and the other is I consider a room full of books a closet and an empty room with a librarian in it to be a library. Many people have wondered what's the difference between a library and a community space, a community center in my point of view, to which I normally respond, what's wrong with being at the center of a community? But actually I'm going to flip that around with a larger answer, and the answer is sort of sitting here behind my shoulder here, the Little Free Library. I love these things, I really do. They are community oriented, you put them up, you put some books, people take them, leave them, etc. But let me ask you this, what can that do that yours can't do? If you look at the collection as your first and foremost thing, if you define innovation as learning where people can get books and therefore learn to do stuff, that's enough. It's a space, it's got books, it's got materials to inspire. What doesn't it have? Well, the short answer is it doesn't have you. That's why I'm on a noisy road to talk about this. Cement truck. It doesn't have you to inspire. It doesn't have you to facilitate. It doesn't have you to point things out, to react, to select, to pick, to look at an open field and see rockets, to look at an open apple orchard and see tourism. The innovation that we're talking about in libraries and being an engine of innovation is the core of being a librarian. And the core of being in a community, knowing the community, talking with the community, being part of the community. The Little Free Library movement's fantastic. Communities can get involved. I think libraries should build them. But I don't think they ever substitute for the idea of an innovation center, for a center of the community that truly values conversation, innovation, understanding, taking us to our next level. Those things over there, let's face it, they remind us of our past more than of our future. What libraries need to be are engines of innovation that help develop tomorrow. In Alan Kay's famous quote, "The best way to predict the future is to invent it," that's your job. Good luck.